Open almost any textbook on the American Revolution, and you find a familiar, rehearsed cast of characters: generals, statesmen, founding fathers, men in powdered wigs debating the nature of liberty, men in uniform marching toward the theater of war. For 2 centuries, we've accepted this narrative as the whole truth. But archives have a stubborn habit of preserving what grand histories choose to leave behind. And beneath the ink of those famous signatures, a far more complex, hidden story is waiting to be told. But this isn't a story of generals or grand strategies. It's a story of whispers in the dark, of needles and thread, and of identities forged in the heat of necessity. We are about to pull back the curtain on the lives that history books forgot to mention. The women who didn't just support the revolution from the sidelines, but in their own quiet and dangerous ways, made it possible. Because when the ink finally dried on the birth of a new nation, it was their fingerprints that remained, hidden in the margins. While the history books were busy recording the thunder of cannons, these women were writing a different kind of record. They were the ones who carried coded messages in the hemlines of their dresses. They were the ones who turned their parlors into underground networks of intelligence. When the front lines moved, they remained, quietly observing, gathering, and altering the course of the conflict from the very heart of the enemy's camp. Tonight, we look past the silhouettes of the famous to find the real architects of American independence. To find the answer, we have to look past the battlefield and into the quiet, everyday spaces of the 18th century. Samuel Gay was not an anomaly. She was a symptom of a much larger, unspoken reality. Across the colonies, women were operating in the shadows of a conflict that officially had no place for them. They were not merely witnesses to history. They were its secret engineers, navigating a world of rigid rules to dismantle the status quo, one dangerous choice at a time. But where do we start when history has spent centuries painting over their tracks? We turn to the primary source, to the letters tucked away in dusty boxes, the account books mislabeled in the basements of libraries, and the diaries written in the margins of proper correspondence. These aren't just documents, they are time capsules, and today we are going to crack them open. Our investigation begins not in the halls of power, but in the places where the real work of revolution was actually done.
Our investigation begins not in a battlefield camp or a congressional chamber. It begins in a farmhouse, Braintree, Massachusetts, September 1774. Inside, a woman sits alone at a small writing desk. Outside, an empire is unraveling. Inside, she is creating one of the most important records of the American Revolution. Her name is Abigail Adams. At first glance, this appears to be an ordinary letter between husband and wife, but one detail immediately stands out. Abigail dates the letter from the Boston Garrison. That single word changes everything. A garrison is not a home. A garrison is a military outpost, a place occupied by soldiers, a place preparing for war. And yet, Abigail is describing her own community. To her, the revolution was not an abstract debate about taxation or representation. It was something she could hear, something she could see, something she could feel pressing against the walls of her home. Every male between 15 and 60 was expected to train. Militia drills became part of daily life. The rhythm of military preparation replaced the rhythm of ordinary existence. In another passage, she describes Boston as the body of a departed friend. The city she once knew still existed physically, but something essential had died. British occupation transformed streets, businesses, and households. The familiar became foreign. The ordinary became military. And for women like Abigail, there was no clear line separating civilian life from war. This is one of the details that often gets overlooked. When historians describe troop movements and political decisions, they usually focus on generals and legislators. But people like Abigail were documenting what those decisions felt like on the ground, what fear looked like, what uncertainty sounded like, what occupation meant inside an ordinary home. Every letter she sent became something more than personal correspondence. It became intelligence, a real-time report from Massachusetts to Philadelphia, a ground-level view of a society sliding toward war. Hundreds of miles away, John Adams was helping shape the future of the colonies, but Abigail was providing something equally valuable: perspective, context, information no official report could fully capture. Then came June 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill, and suddenly the war was no longer approaching, it had arrived. In a letter written shortly afterward, Abigail described hearing what she called Britannia's thunders. The roar of artillery rolled across the landscape. The fires of Charlestown burned so brightly they could be seen from miles away. For modern audiences, battles often appear as dots on a map. For Abigail Adams, they were visible from her doorstep. At one point, she writes, "My bursting heart must find vent at my pen." Not the language of a distant observer, the language of someone living through a crisis. For more than a year, she lived with the constant possibility of violence, the possibility that British forces could move against her community, the possibility that the conflict could reach her family directly, the possibility that everything she knew could disappear. And this is where the letters become especially valuable, because Abigail was not simply recording emotions, she was recording conditions, military activity, public sentiment, economic strain, political reactions. Taken together, her correspondence forms one of the most detailed civilian accounts of the Revolutionary era. In effect, Abigail Adams became an unofficial war correspondent, not from a battlefield, but from something just as important, the home front. She was witnessing a transformation. The boundaries between politics and domestic life were collapsing. The revolution was entering kitchens, entering farms, entering families, and women were becoming participants whether society recognized them or not. But if Abigail Adams was documenting the revolution, another woman was shaping how people understood it. She wasn't carrying intelligence, she was carrying ideas, and her weapon was a pen.
A pen that would become one of the most dangerous weapons in the American Revolution. And that is where our investigation continues. Somewhere in an archive, another forgotten story is still waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to Forgotten Ages and join us as we uncover the people history left behind. And tell me in the comments, before watching this documentary, had you ever heard of Abigail Adams' role in the Revolution? Part 2, The Intellectual Bayonet, coming soon.